right, so for today, we are looking at translating expressions. Translating expressions from numbers, symbols, and letters into words and vice versa. So if we turn to page 5, you can pause to update your table of contents. Our page 5 will have the title, Translating Expressions. The main thing here is that it's a lot of vocabulary, meaning different operations. So we're going to look at our 4 main operations and look at the words that mean each of them. So we're going to start with addition. So all the words that could mean addition. So we have like the easy ones like plus, add, right? We know those are fine. If we want to look at the word sum, spelled S-U-M, that's technically the answer to an addition problem. When you see that, you need to find the answer of that first. So if it goes out of order of operations, you're going to need to put parentheses around it. So if it has sum, you're going to put like 4, the sum of 4 and 3, 4 plus 3, and then parentheses around it. You'd want to find the answer to that first before doing anything else. And according to order of operations, addition is last, so you may have to put parentheses around it. We have some other easy ones. We have like increased. Whoa. Spell that correctly. Increased by, added to. And then I saved this one for last because it's weird. If we have more than, fewer than, less than, it flips it. So really be careful if you see a than in there. So I'm going to draw arrows so you understand you have to switch those because it's implying that it's more than the original one, which would go first. So you switch your units. So let's look at an example of some addition. So here we'll do a little example here. So if it were a number t more than 6, we know that more than is addition. That's fine. That's good. But that more than implies that t is more than the original 6. So the 6 starts it, and then you add t. The other thing to note is look at your handwriting. If your addition sign looks like your T, you need to fix it some way, somehow. I do curves on my T's. You can make your plus sign smaller. Just make sure you know the difference. And when you write it on the test that they look different, all right? Because if they start to look the same, then who knows what's going on. All right, so we got our addition. Let's do subtraction next. So our subtraction words could be minus. Let's start with an easy one. Decreased by. Let's talk about difference. Difference is again that answer to a subtraction problem. So if we see that word difference, we're going to put parentheses around. Oh, sorry. Didn't realize that was off the screen. So difference means the answer to a subtraction problem. So we need to subtract first before anything else. So you're going to want to put parentheses around that. Then we have our less than. We talked about the thans. Watch out for the thans. Less than, more than, fewer than. So that less than is subtraction, but it switches it. If we look up here, if we combine those, it doesn't matter the order because it has commutative property of addition. With subtraction, order matters. And if you don't flip it, it's wrong. It's incorrect. So let's see. Let's go through all the flipped versions of subtraction because subtraction has a lot more. So we have less than, fewer than, switches it as well. Subtracted from. That from is implying that it's from our original number. So again, that one is switched again. So just really be careful of those. All right. We're going to go through a few more operations before we do another example. That way we have a few more options to work with. So we're going to do multiplication next. So multiplication, we have, well, let's start with our weird one with parentheses. We have product of. So when we talk about product, that's the answer to a multiplication problem. Now, multiplication is a little bit higher up on the food chain in order of operations than addition and subtraction. So these parentheses are sometimes required, and sometimes order of operations does the multiplication before anything else. So the parentheses aren't needed per se. So just make sure you find the answer to that multiplication before moving on. We'll look at an example of that in just a moment. Multiplied by times, if we're going with some easy one, times. We also have of. Of is a very small word that means multiplication, but of means multiplication. Most always when you see that in math class, occasionally it'll just be an of as like an article word. So those are pretty much the main ones for multiplication. So I'm going to show you an example before we get to division that combines both multiplication and subtraction. So we have another example here. So we have 10 less than the product of 7 and F. So we see two operators here. We have a less than for subtraction, and we have product for multiplication. So those are key. You're going to want to note those. So we have a expression going on here that's a bit more complicated than the one we did back up there. So I usually start with the operators first. So if it's less than, I'll put that subtraction sign. We have to remember we're flopping it. We're flip-flopping it. So that 10 will actually go over here on the right. And then this whole piece will go on the left. Okay, so over here on the left, we need the product of 7 and F. Product is multiplication. So we could write that as 7 right next to our F. That shows multiplication. Now, if we go back to order of operations, we know that we're going to multiply before we subtract. So those parentheses that we were talking about, you can put, but it's a little redundant because we're already multiplying first. If you want to get into the habit, you can just put parentheses around it and they'll just be there as a little extra. But in this case, if you notice, we're going to multiply first anyway, rather than subtract, so they're not needed in this instance. So you could write it with the parentheses, or you could just write it as 7F minus 10. Either works in this case. All right, and our final operator for this translating here is division. We have quotient of. And now that's, again, the answer to a division problem. Now, I'm going to put parentheses around it. Most of the time, you'll see that as a fraction bar. If you want to do like a fraction bar over 1, because that won't change it. But you can put a fraction bar as well, because that kind of implies that you grouped your numerator and you grouped the denominator, depending on what's out here. But usually, we don't necessarily need parentheses because order of operations, that'll go first. But just in case we have that idea still. We also have divided by. That's nice, classic. It could be some sort of phrase like split equally. So everything gets the same amount, so you're dividing it equally. All right, so we're going to do another example, which kind of implies division, but doesn't really say it out loud. Our next example would be 2/3 of the volume V. Let me switch that up. So sorry. 2/3 of the volume V. Now that's talking about a fraction. Fractions are division. So you could add that as another example. Any fraction words. So you could put like fraction words, if that helps you. That also shows division. So we can write this as a fraction, but we can write it two different ways. We could write our 2/3 out front. Now our operator, we have another operator here, this of. Watch out for that little tiny word. It means multiplication. So we're going to have 2/3 being multiplied by the volume V. So if we have multiplication, we put the V right next to it. There's multiplication. Now this is our fraction out front of our variable. We could also multiply it in. So if we multiply it in, it would look like 2 times V is 2V all over 3. Those are your two different ways to write it. Both are correct. It's just a matter of preference. We're going to see this side more often, especially when we're dealing with slope, because then we have our rise over run immediately. This one sometimes is easier to evaluate. Then you don't have to deal with repeating decimals sometimes, depending on what that volume is. It might save us some weird writing. But that's pretty much the words to look out for. I'm going to put in there a resource for you to look at. So there's a bunch of options and what they could mean. But this is just a resource. If you get stuck on any of your homework, you can look at it. And then there's a bunch of words that go with your sign. We're not going to use equal signs yet because that's equations. Since we are in expressions, we won't see an equal sign at this point. But if you get a word that you don't quite know that we didn't go over, it would be in here. Because there are a lot, but these are the main words, are the ones we wrote down. Those are the ones you'll see most often.